Thank you, Victor. And I would like to thank David as well for this cordial invitation and the organizing committee. It's an honor to be here, taking part at this international forum. Welcome once again. And let me introduce the first panel of the second day on the agenda. We will try to reflect on and debate the topic regarding policies so that well-being is entitled to all of us. Is this a right? And we will also evaluate the opportunities through the redistributive and progressive policies. Furthermore, we will also cover information regarding the assessment of the social well-being as well as the public policies. All in all, we will try to understand from a general perspective these multidimensional concepts so that we can focus on the rights, aiming at capacity development and the creation of opportunities through different policies. As we stated before, redistributive and progressive policies. We have two experts as part of this panel, and we have Bruno Frey, Swiss economist, director of the Center for Research in Economics, Management and the Arts in Switzerland. Welcome, Mr. Bruno Frey. Ms. Maria Ana Lugo, she's an economist from Argentina. She's the head for Latin America and the Caribbean of the World Bank. Mariana, welcome. We will also have Ms. Graciela Tonon. She's a politologist from Argentina. She's a research professor at the Lomas de Zamora and the Palermo University, both in Argentina, and this will be a teleconference. It was not possible for her to be here because of a health-related issue. And finally, we have Mr. Enrique Cardenas. He's a Mexican economist, and he's head of the Espinosa Iglesias Research Center. Welcome, Enrique Cardenas. And Graciela Teruel, Mexican economist. She's a research professor at the Ibero-American University. She specializes on well-being measurement and assessment, as well as the social programs that pertain to that specific topic. She's an academician at the Ibero-American University, where she has a position as a research professor for sustainable well-being and social development. Welcome. Without further ado, I will next give the word to Mr. Bruno Frey, professor of economics at the Subseplan University in Germany, and he is research director at the Center for Economics, Management and Arts in Switzerland. He was named a distinguished professor of behavioral sciences at the Warwick Business School at the University of Warwick in the UK from the year 2010 until 2013, and he's the managing editor of Kiklos. Bruno Frey, welcome. Thank you very much. I am pleased to be here this morning during this conference regarding happiness and economics, or I should say economic development. Thank you very much for this invitation. I apologize in advance for not being able to give my presentation in Spanish, given that I do not speak it fluently, a beautiful language I might add, and I don't speak it well. So I will give my presentation in English.
Yesterday, We heard a lot about how to measure happiness, the problems and the possibilities, and also what follows from that on indices, how to capture happiness or felicidad. I think we reached to some extent a consensus, namely to put happiness in the focus of development. At least I thought that there was a consensus on that. Actually, two persons didn't agree. Robert Biswas-Diener, as well as Gordon Matthew, thought it should also be possible to have people who are not happy, that we should allow for this. But I think that goes somewhat too far. However, I agree with the fact that there are other goals in society, such as solidarity or loyalty or justice. I think these goals, solidarity, justice, and loyalty, are at least as important as happiness. But nevertheless, I think it is a nice idea to put happiness in the center of development. Moreover, it doesn't matter so much what we individuals think what is correct. After all, a lot of countries like Bhutan, France, the United Kingdom, and even China have taken over this approach. A lot of international organizations, such as the UN, commissions and declarations on this. So it is in the center of politics today. I think that's well taken to think about the indices of happiness, but I don't want to go into that again, because I think no repetition is needed. Very much has been said already. I rather want to go forward. I would like to present two approaches which we might consider. The first approach is the concentration on indices or on the index of well-being as a goal of policy, as a goal for government policy. And the second approach, which differs, is to focus on the issues, on the real problems we have. And I would like to argue that this is not the same. It's even basically different. In the second case, where we focus on real ideas, happiness is only increased indirectly because you undertake, or a government undertakes, the right policies. And if a government undertakes the right policies, indirectly happiness rises. While with the index approach, governments try to steer directly at raising happiness. My message is that happiness indices are not so important. I'm rather critical of them, especially of country comparisons. And I'm most critical of indices as a goal of government policy. And my second proposition or message is we should concentrate to find out what makes people happy. So I would first like to shortly discuss this direct index approach, where the government says, I want to raise this particular index of happiness. These are good intentions, but good intentions are not sufficient. I see two major problems. The first is there are a great number of indices. I mentioned some. Gross national happiness, gross national happiness indicator, genuine progress indicator, life satisfaction indicator, eudaimonia indicator, global happiness indicator, relative happiness indicator, world happiness indicator, happy planet index happiness indicator, etc., etc. Now, the OECD, who is a co-organizer of this conference, made something quite interesting. You probably know the Better Life Index of OECD. And there they do not present one index, but every person visiting this internet site can construct his or her own index by assigning weights to the determinants of happiness. And this means that there are not 5 or 10 or 20 indices of happiness, but 1,000 or even 10,000 of happiness indicators. So what should the government do when there are 10,000 different happiness indicators? Of course, they choose one, but why do they choose one and not the other? Here we have a real problem. It's no longer a useful guide for policy when you have such a large number of indices. My second point is even more important, I think. It's the systematic distortions of the happiness indicators which will take place. Now, what are these distortions? The main point is you can construct happiness indicators reasonably well as long as it's not a government policy. But as soon as a happiness indicator is an official policy goal, it will be distorted. Necessarily, not by chance, necessarily. And there are two reasons for this. The first is the strategic answers of people who are asked, taken overall, how satisfied are you with your life on a scale from 0 to 10? The answers will be distorted when the result of this survey is politically relevant. Just assume for a second that you are a left-winger, but that your government is a right-wing government. And then comes some scholar and asks you, are you happy? Then you say, no, of course not, because this terrible right-wing government is in power. And the other way around, when you are a right-winger and when you are asked, are you happy with the life you lead? Of course you will say no when you have a left-wing government in power. So that is the first systematic distortion we can observe. Again, it's systematic, it's not random. People do react. And if you just consider for a second how you would react when you are assuming that you are a left-winger and there's a right-wing government, you won't say, I'm terribly happy under a right-wing government. You wouldn't say that. The second distortion, there are, of course, strong incentives for governments to manipulate the happiness index. Now, you might think that I'm very cynical about governments. But look at, for instance, GNP, how it's manipulated by every government. Unemployment rates, how they are manipulated. For instance, people who have been long-time unemployed are no longer counted as unemployed. That's crazy, but that is the fact. Or inflation. Yesterday we had a lady from Argentina. The official inflation rate in Argentina is or has been 12%. Actually, it was 32%. That is what governments do when it counts. And if there is a happiness indicator, which is the most general thing, all the governments in the world, including the Swiss government and the Mexican government and the German and the American and every government in the world will manipulate this index. And when they are in power, they will push it up. And in order not to, this does not improve the welfare of the people, it just raises the index. And I think we should know that before and not afterwards. So when happiness is an official goal of policy, this happiness index loses its role as information of how well people are, citizens are. So I now would like to go to the approach I think is useful, namely, let's look at the problems in our society. Focus on issues, what is not so good, what is good also, but especially what is not so good. Which means that we should concentrate on the relationships between the determinants of happiness and the outcome of happiness. And that is, of course, what we have found and studied extensively in modern happiness research. So the question is, what are the determinants of happiness and how do they exactly influence happiness? We can find this out by serious econometric or statistical analysis. We look at simultaneous influences of a great many variables at the same time on happiness. In my own research, we had 31 variables influencing happiness. So we wouldn't say it's only income that influences happiness. No, we say there are really 31 important influences and we must consider them at the same time. So very quickly, what are the major insights from happiness research from my point of view, that is my own point of view? The first is, of course, material or economic determinants, income. Now I would like to ask you a question. Would you please raise your hand if you think that people with higher income are more happy than people with lower income? Who would say that? And who would have the opposite view, namely that happiness has nothing whatsoever to do with material things, with income? Who thinks that? Oh, thank you, the majority. I'm afraid the majority is wrong, for once. Normally the majority is, of course, correct, but not here. All the studies I know of, really all the studies, find that people with higher income are happier. It's not funny to be poor. It's terrible to be poor. You don't know what meal you get in the evening, if you get any. You don't know where you live. You don't know what your children will be in the future. And when you are sick, you are in huge trouble when you are poor. While when you are rich, you go to a private hospital and have it fixed and you go on. So higher income makes you happy. However, variability also plays a role. We have a strong asymmetry. When per capita income falls, this has a huge impact on happiness. Namely, happiness drops tremendously. While when income goes up, happiness also rises, but not to such an extent. So we have here a clear asymmetry. Then we have the distributional aspects, which Stefano Bartolini mentioned and discussed yesterday. Here I'm interested in something very funny, which is, to whom do you compare yourself? Do you compare yourself to richer people, or to people who have less money? Now, there are a lot of studies on that, and they all tell you people tend to compare to people who have more. But that makes you unhappy. It's a silly thing to compare upwards. You should compare downwards, and then you feel you are great and you are happy. And the question is, why do people do that? I have a theory on that, but I won't explain it here. Then I think we should not solely concentrate on income inequality, but rather at the dynamic effects involved. I think worse than seeing a lot of inequality in society is not to have the chance of rising up. So upward mobility is an essential thing for happiness. If you see that you are blocked when you are 15 or 20 or 25, when you see you are blocked, you cannot rise, then you get unhappy. While when you see a chance of rising, then it's good for you. Now, sorry. Employment. It's very interesting that people who are self-employed are happier than those working in firms. It is surprising because the self-employed, on average, earn less, work more, and have a higher risk. These three factors should decrease happiness. It's not true. Self-employed are happier than those employed in firms. And of course, one of the major negative effects on happiness is unemployment. That really decreases happiness tremendously. Now I come to social determinants. Again, here that was discussed yesterday by, for instance, Mariano Rojas also and Stefano Bartolini again. That is very important. Health is very important. That was discussed by Robert Biswas Diener with this nice experiment. I have another example or case. With psychic health, it's difficult to identify, the causal relationship. Of course, those who are psychically well off are happier, but it's also the other way around. Those who are happy are in better health. And there is a nice study by nuns in the United States. This study asked young girls who entered a monastery, an order, they inquired about their happiness, and they differed in happiness. And about 30 years later, or 40 years later, they looked who of them are still living. And those who were happy at the very beginning lived longer than the other nuns. And the study goes well because nuns live under very, very similar conditions. Now I come to the really important determinants, which were discussed rather little here, namely the political ones. First, bureaucracy. Bureaucracy kills you. It really destroys your intrinsic motivation, initiative, and optimism. And bureaucracy makes a lot of effort to undermine the possibility to be self-employed. Bureaucracy is one of the worst things for happiness. You cannot do anything if the bureaucracy jumps on you, you are lost, even if you're otherwise a happy person. The second political determinant, participation rights, are also extremely important. And I think these participation rights should and could be applied both in the political sphere and in firms. And in the case of political participation rights, it's not only elections, but also popular referenda. I think that is the future of a flourishing democracy. More direct participation rights. Now, I think what you have in your mind, you say, how can you leave important political decisions to the mass of the people? They don't know anything. They are badly informed. They cannot take this decision. Wrong. Definitely wrong. It's the other way around. When you have referenda, people start to get informed. And when they are informed, they are able to take good decisions. It's not that, of course, in a country where you don't have referenda, why should you be interested in politics? It's the politicians who do everything. But in a country where you can co-determine by referenda, you get interested and you get informed. My conclusion is the index approach may be valuable, but has huge problems, especially the distorted information. And I would like to argue that we should concentrate on the problems. And if we are able to deal with the problems, then the population will be happy. And I would in particular emphasize the political determinants, including, I forgot before, decentralization, which Mike Viking was hinting at yesterday. I think decentralization is very important, and I'm very happy that it is the state of Jalisco who organized this conference. That is a good start. Not the central government in Mexico City, Jalisco and Guadalajara, and therefore I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Bruno, for this excellent and magnificent effort on your part so that you could actually abide by the agenda. Thank you very much. You're right on time. And next we will hear from Maria Ana Lugo. She's a consultant at the World Bank. She's from Argentina, and she works with the poverty-related issues. She works in Paraguay and Bolivia. She's from Argentina. She has a PhD in economy by the Oxford University, and she's focused. Her research is focused on poverty measurement and assessment, as well as monetary inequivalence opportunity inequivalent and inequities, as well as economic related issues. Welcome, Maria Ana Luco. Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to extend my appreciation to David Gomez for this cordial invitation. I have no idea how we can move on and talk after Bruno Fey, who has illuminated us, who has enlightened us with his presentation. I do have a confession to make. You might have noticed this, and that's the fact I have nothing to do with happiness. This is the first time I talk about satisfaction or happiness for that matter, and I have learned so much during these past 2 days, well, yesterday and the beginning of this day. So David Gomez, thank you very much for this invitation. Furthermore, I think that the reason behind his invitation is because I have some experience with multidimensional well-being assessment outside the traditional income measurements, but mainly when we talk about my work, the type of work I carry out, I am fortunate to work as an attaché to the Bolivian government in order to measure well-being, and they have a different word for this. Instead of well-being, they say living well. The concept of living well. And on a personal note, this was a recent effort. We just started with this program. However, there's a number of reflections that might be interesting for all of you as well. So during this new measurement process, there's learning, of course. It's a learning curve. Let me share with you the critical steps that have to be taken whenever we set forward a new well-being measure as a political policy guideline, and to what extent the information regarding subjective well-being can be inserted or embedded into a process of a kind. I would like to move on with the slides. So, during the following 17 minutes, I will try to explain why it's important to measure well-being from a multidimensional perspective. Without any doubt, this is a different approach when compared to traditional income indexes. So, once I convince you that this is the way it should be, but I don't need to convince you because this audience is pretty literate and educated with this regard, but well-being can be measured in many ways. But let's talk about multidimensional, and let's see if you follow me and if you agree with me. First and foremost, we have the variable selection. That will be the dimensions or the dominions or arenas and indicators. The second has to do with the aggregation or non-aggregating any of these factors. And the third is the weighing of the value of the previous data gathered, whether or not we should aggregate it. Okay, so why should we have a multidimensional approach? I believe that many philosophers and economists and scholars have thought about this, have considered this. For example, Sen, Rawls, Nussbaum, and Stiglitz, Sen, Fitoussi, which was mentioned yesterday, in fact, many times. So these authors and scholars focus on moving away from the income arena to a more complex one. It stands clear that very few people understand well-being as highly connected to income. In fact, income should not be considered for well-being measurement. Everybody understands that it should be and that it is multidimensional. Inside the World Bank, as a matter of fact, most of us understand that well-being and poverty are multidimensional. However, given the complexity of some markets and given the importance that some of the indicators have, for example, the objective that they serve for, There have been recommendations or suggestions that only working around the income is not sufficient. Hence, it's of most importance to broaden the analysis. People who could be defined as poverty or within the poverty line acknowledge that there's a multidimension to their condition. From the standpoint of subjective analysis, when one asks oneself what happiness is and what determines happiness, and Bruno Fay explained this quite extensively, we understand that there's a number of factors determining the well-being from a subjective standpoint. These are some of the many arguments, conceptual arguments. Therefore, it's important to broaden, as I stated before, our analysis. It's important to acknowledge, however, that from an empiric perspective, there's a correlation which is not perfect amongst the indicators. If they were perfect, if they were perfectly correlated, we will always go back to income. But it's precisely because there's a correlation gap. Yesterday somebody talked about 0.05 or 0.06 of correlation between life satisfaction and income. Of course, we're talking about a positive correlation. We're talking about an interesting correlation. There's a space or a gap between 0.04 and 0.05 where the correlation is not perfect. And that gap, precisely that gap, is ideal for the design of policies. Therefore, we need to broaden our scope. That's why many international organizations and many governments are rethinking how to measure well-being. Next slide, please. We have the critical steps. First and foremost, we need to select the variables and whether or not we will add or aggregate, maybe by the use of a portfolio of variables and the selection of weights or weighing the possibilities. This step, which is fundamental, and it's not an easy one, I might add, especially when we are talking about defining the well-being for a government. I have spent many years in my room researching and studying, analyzing multidimensional perspectives. And well, I can have income here, education, health, and that would be it, and I can move forward. Governments don't have that advantage that a student can have, such as my case when I was performing this analysis. This is way more complicated and it has to be taken on seriously, and it's an extensive process. I am now understanding this. Bolivia, as a country, is trying to identify which the most important variables are for well-being. Different people, of course, adopt different criteria or focus. One that is commonly used is basing the decision on regulations and standards, using our thoughts and our reflections so that we can in turn select the dimensions. For instance, Marta Nussbaum inspires herself on capability or capacity training so that she can work on a list, a checklist, if you will. Ross also does something similar, or in Mexico we have the social rights, which is an axis topic, and Mexico as a country bases itself on the constitution to see which should be more cared for. Bolivia is currently using the analysis of ancestral knowledge to see what the dominions are, and from within those dominions, which indicators could work better. A second approach is more pragmatic, and that is the one that Colombia has taken on. Colombia uses the well-being measures as a policy coordinating tool. So it has been defined in advance who will work with these variables. We have to work, or they have to work with the secretariats and ministries, and there has to be coordination in place. A third approach would be the empirical one, using the well-being analysis such as Bruno Frey's analysis, to determine what people care about, what people really care about when we want to know whether or not they are feeling okay, if they are feeling happy, if they are doing well. So there's three major roles I identify when talking about subjective well-being and the pertaining information. So we could use this as a sole indicator under a standard or a norm stating that happiness is what matters. Happiness is what matters will be the motto, such as the one indicated under the United Nations Global Report. But we have caveats, and this has been well presented by Gordon Matthews and Bruno Frey. A second approach for well-being information use would be to complement other more objective measures for well-being, multidimensional, always multidimensional, and this could include monetary and non-monetary, such as the case of Bhutan. They do call it happiness index, but it includes non-monetary reasons, which are not relevant all the time. And the third way through which we can use the subjective well-being information, as suggested by Bruno Frey. I am basing my presentation on Bruno Frey's. And that is a tool to select the non-monetary variables. Next slide, please. Very well. Let's define the next step. We understand that this is a 1 or 2 year process, extensive process, identifying the variables, identifying all the data. Now, what are we going to do with all the data that was gathered? For example, maybe we can use 2 or 3 variables, but what do we do with the remaining 68, for instance? Well, firstly, we need to present the dimensions separately, but simultaneously. This is a scope that Atkinson and colleagues suggested in the year 2002 in a paper they presented before the European Commission, and it's widely used by the World Bank. This is a focus that is preferred by Martin Raviello when measuring poverty index. An alternative approach would be to aggregate all these dimensions for one sole or unique index, and the United Nations have worked with that in mind, both for the human development as well as the multidimensional poverty index. Likewise, Bhutan's government worked on this focus as well. What basically happens is that all information is added through individuals and through dimensions on one index, one core index. And number 3, we have the intermediate dimension. We will move forward. I will skip some of these slides because I was going to elaborate on them, but a previous one. I will focus the rest of my topic on these options, which are most commonly used. When we use a panel or a portfolio of indicators, we can use the best information possible from all the indicators. There's no need to think about where to weigh more or which should have more weight. There's many opinions, of course, and there's no need to get involved with all these complicated issues. However, when doing that, we miss out on information pertaining to the actual happiness of the people. It's not the same to have one person that doesn't have access to education, another one denied access to house, for example, another one denied to freedom, or that one person has the 4 situations at the same time. The information is lost when we use a portfolio of indicators. So we should use an index instead of a portfolio. This would give us proper order as to which the best one is, which department is working better, which area is not working at all. And this is pretty good for politics. And we can understand the level of extent of the deprived members of the society, or where it affects the most. We need to understand where the weight should be more inflicted. Next, please. An alternative view, and I will talk about this very briefly, less than a minute. When we have low dimension number, for example, 3 or 4, we could represent the information to understand how we are doing or how we are going about the deprived access. Atkinson and co-authors proposed this type of graph for the EU analysis. With this deprived access, we clearly understand multiple factors that people suffer from, but at the same time, we understand which ones are more relevant. We, of course, need the information to be based on one single source. But this type of Venn diagram can be very useful when presenting information. Next. The last issue on my talk for the last 3 to 4 minutes has to do with the weights I have been talking about. Let's suppose that I decide to work on one single indicator. Without any doubt, we need to select accurately the weight we will apply on the indicators. So, firstly, functionally, but secondly, linearly. We have to work on a linear scheme. There are many ways to do so. With one co-author, we worked on a magazine or an article thinking about this variables. We found 8 ways to go about this. We divided them into 3 groups. Those that are data-based, what it is, what people choose. And we can have frequency methods, statistical methods, or the more favorable methods. On the other end, we have what should be. Select the weights from a normative or standardization approach. So we give the same weight to all the aspects. Some people might say that this is objective, that there's no values added. Of course, values are added here. Every dimension has the same situation. So one more year at school will be equivalent to 1 additional year of my life. Or having access to green parks has the same value that one child attending nursery school. So these are not easy decisions to make, and they are very important. It's mandatory to dedicate part of our time for this reflection. So I would like to highlight one of these methods. I think that this is very important. This is a hybrid method I present to you. It's not what it is or what should be, but it's right in the middle, the hybrid. And it uses information based on what the interviews responded. And this is like a second dimension. And this is my last presentation. I have 1 minute. 2 ways to do so. The first one is asking directly to people. How important is education? How important is health? How important is housing? And people, of course, rank that out. And there's an average calculated based on those results. And this is what the people might give us as an answer. And we can work that divided into groups. Another way to do so, well, a second approach, whenever information is not available, but I do believe it's important and it's interesting, is that whenever we have a well-being survey, we have monetary, non-monetary, and subjective variables. So we can work on the ratio or relationship in an implicit way as to what people prefer. And we can do well-being regression, if you may. With that, I would like to conclude by underscoring the relevance of decisions taken when working on a metric for well-being analysis. Also, it's important to understand how interesting the information, subjective information is. And it could be potentially useful when taking into consideration the process we will pursue. Thank you very much. I just went 1 minute of agenda.
Gracias, Mariana.
Thank you, María
Toca
Ana.
el turno ahora a
Next we have
Cárdenas
Enrique
Sánchez.
Cárdenas Sánchez.
Enrique dirige el Centro
Enrique
de
is
Estudios
the
Espinosa Iglesias,
head of the
Asociación
Espinosa
Civil,
Iglesias
un instituto
Center.
de
It's a civil
investigación
association, a research center. In
independiente,
fact, it's an
dedicado
independent
al
center
estudio,
that is
diseño
focused on
e
the study,
implementación de
design, and
políticas
implementation of
públicas
public
y acciones
policies,
sociales enfocadas
as
a la
well as
movilidad social
social
y al bienestar
activities
socioeconómico.
for the social
Economista
well-being
del
and the
ITAM, con maestría y
social
doctorado
economy.
en economía
He
de la
graduated at the
Universidad de
ITAM and
Yale.
he has a
Es
master's
premio,
and a
además,
PhD from the
nacional
Yale
de
University,
Economía
and he was
Banamex.
awarded
Enrique,
the
te cedo la palabra.
Economy Prize.
Muy buenas, buenos días, muchísimas gracias.
Good morning.
A los organizadores por esta invitación.
I would like to thank the organizing committee for this invitation, and such as my colleague before me, I have never talked about happiness, only my own happiness, but what I would like to present next is a report that we recently issued based on one of the core elements of our center, one of the research axes, reporting what we have noted over two nationwide surveys. And this is what we will refer to as social mobility. This is the axis or easy access with which people can move from an economic perspective. So it's an intertemporary stage, how people compare themselves when young and when they grow older. So this will be determining the future. One person when young will have an opinion, and we have to understand how the person moved socioeconomically. Why is this important? Well, this socioeconomic development should be based on the talent, the effort of the individuals, the families surrounding them, and the context. And it should not be defined by the crib accident. We have a term, it's called crib accident. For example, you have the bird coming all the way from Paris, France, and you know that it drops the baby. So you are here or you are there. So let's say we have Santa Fe in Mexico City, which is the most expensive area, and you can fall down right in Santa Fe or next to it. So then it's not good for you. And the merit should be what makes you become who you should become, not where you were born, or the conditions, the crib conditions. So the stork is not the one that should decide your future. So why promote mobility? Well, we have the social integration and justice and efficiency. As Dr. Frey said, of course, happiness is always an important factor. We agree with him, but this is an indirect aspect. I will speak directly to the microphone. So let's talk about talent distribution, which is somehow homogenic. So those people that, because of their birth conditions and where they start their lives, cannot move forward, the talent will be lost. Hence, they miss out on the opportunity as well as their families. We have the CEEY, this is the research center that has worked for the past 8 years on research, reading, analysis, and a great deal of information that has been gathered. We believe that measures should be in two ways. First and foremost, we have the absolute mobility, where you are initially and where you can move to, and the second one is relative mobility. So this is based on quintiles of the population. If you are born in a certain quintile of the population, you can move forward. Some people move up, some people move down. It's within the quadrant. Now, when it comes to income distribution, this is the quintiles I was referring to over a 20-year period, and the gaps are not moving that much. They are not altered somehow. And that indicates that this is a sticky mixture. It's not permeable. The distribution is not allowing for the gaps to be diminished. Now, this analysis information is available for all of you. It has been reviewed, and these are retrospective questions. Let's say that you are asked what your situation was when you were 14 years old and what your situation is now, and where you lived, the conditions of your house, the educational level of your parents. It's a very extensive questionnaire, an hour, 15 minutes to respond to all the questions. But from there, we can derive socioeconomical perspectives and relative terms before and after. Second survey includes 11,000 very useful surveys that have national representation, and unlike international surveys, this does distinguish between men and women head of the house, what we call the one that is in control of the house. We do differentiate whether or not it's the father or the mother. We are looking for information to be further gathered. As a matter of fact, this information is posted on the website in English and Spanish. Maybe our colleagues from abroad might be interested in getting to know what the information is, and it has been posted in English. The idea here is to observe the mobility options from parents to children and see which public policies could facilitate social mobility. So social mobility is the result of many other inputs. It's not the goal per se, but rather, I would picture this as the flow. Let's picture a river, and we can see trash and logs and rocks, and it's not possible for the water to flow easily, but we will remove the obstacles and the water can flow easily, so the society will be flowable as well. We also have the intergeneration mobility from one generation to the following. I stated this before. And also the children's position, whether or not it has been determined by the parents and what causes that to be the case. What do results show? Firstly, we have low levels of mobility. This is not surprising. This is on the international context as well. I will share some data later on. The medium stratum, I will focus on quintiles, or the five line. We have the first quintile, which is the lowest one, the 5 line, and then the fourth line, third line, second line, and first line. I will focus on this up and down. And on an international context, the poorest line, in the case of Mexico, we have the orange bar with 48% accounting for still poor second generation. So if you are born in a poor condition, you will remain in that 1 out of 5 times. The numbers in the remaining countries from which we have data, of course, because this is not a survey that is carried out worldwide, but we can have an idea as to how we are doing when compared to other countries. The 48% I just showed, what happens to the remaining 52? So 48% are remaining in that condition, 22% are on the second level, 14% on the third, 11 on the fourth, and only 4% can move to the fifth quintile. So when we talk about incomes, we are not talking about multidimensional happiness or any other factors that have been mentioned here, but we do notice that 7 out of 10 people that are born in the lowest level of poverty practically remain there. Let me state this before. 70% of people that are poor will remain poor. The same people. They are not moving anywhere. So we have, for example, poverty programs, and we have many programs in place, but we don't know. We suspect that we have many millions of poor people. Here we do know who we're talking about. If you are within a poor community, it's very likely 7 out of 10 times that you will remain in that condition. There's very little hope in our country to move forward, or to move upward, I should say. Now, the ones that are rich, or born rich, this is the highest quintile, are maybe in that position for good, or maybe they go down just one step, one line. So very few mobility on the extremes, in both cases, poverty and the wealthy.
Que sigue, por favor.
Next, please. Thank you.
Ahora, si nos vamos a la percepción,
So let's talk about
la encuesta
perception.
también viene
The survey
de,
also
estos elementos de
includes
percepción.
perception elements.
En general existe que
And
la percepción
from a
de que nos
general
hemos
perspective,
quedado más o menos
we
igual,
believe that we are somehow the same or at the same position, despite the fact that there has been some mobility. We think that when we start off being poor, the perception that we will do better is not always actual or factual, but the perception oftentimes is the opposite, that we think that we have moved forward very rapidly, and that's not the case. We understand that when the opposite happens, people might not be in a wealthy position any longer, but they don't feel that they have gone down that drastically. Now, this matrix talks about the people that were on the first quintile and how many people moved down one level. If you remember, we had the 48%, and it's not the fact that they are still on the same level, but that many others moved downward or upward. When you were on a higher level, you do believe that you went down dramatically, even though that was not the case. Let's talk about some of the conditions or determinants for the permeability within the society, and of course we have to consider education. With that in mind, we have education coverage that the coverage has been increased dramatically. However, regardless of your socioeconomical condition, you might get to elementary school. Some make it to junior high school, but they start to stalk. It's very hard to get to the to the high school, to the actual high school, 12, 11, and 13, and superior education or college. We have the educational chart of those that were born in the lowest level of poverty. We have only 5% that actually make it to the professional degree or to college, and the percentages speak for themselves. So we have elementary school and junior high school, and that's the highest concentration for the poorer levels. The opposite happens to those people that are in a higher wealth condition. For example, the junior high school is, in most of the cases, achieved. This gives us the idea of the trap, the educational trap. So if poor people don't go beyond junior high school, and wealthy people, I'm not talking about wealthy per se, but the people that are in this first quintile, as I have described before, if they do not go below junior high school and incomes are correlated to the educational level, which is graphed out here, we would clearly understand that incomes are increased at junior high school, high school and college. For any given reason, if one person is born poor and cannot make it to high school or university, is destined automatically not to have the incomes that this type of educational levels shall provide. And the opposite also happens. The opposite is also true, because if you are in a superior level, you will have higher incomes because of the studies that are at least of high school level. So this is a trap, kind of a trap. It's a reproduction of inequality based on the educational system that we have implemented. This is why it's so important to analyze it. Furthermore, we can understand that parents' education is relevant. The higher the level of education of the father, the children would follow. We always at least intend them to have what we had, or more, in terms of educational level. We have the occupational mobility, and this is consistent with some of the factors. This is for sociologists and economists, but basically we're talking about the same results. So when we move on from a manual to a non-manual activity, there's still a gap. From manual to non-manual, well, it depends on certain degrees or qualifications, but actually moving from one scenario to the other, it's pretty complicated. When it comes to the gender, we understand that there's a serious condition here. There's mobility, but not the good type of mobility we are referring to. If you're in the highest quintile, it's much easier for you to go down. And if you are down, it's very complicated to go up. And this is true for women as opposed to men. So less development possibilities for women, and that, of course, or for the female gender, and this, of course, calls out for gender-oriented policies. Next. Next slide. I will skip it, actually. Let me move on to the to the public policies, and then I will refer very briefly to the social organizations we have worked with at this research center. So how can we actually generate social mobility? Well, there has to be equality when it comes to opportunities and competencies. This is very similar to the Zen concept. We need to have capacities and capabilities that have to be actual, they have to be real competences, and there has to be assurance. So protection mechanisms that avoid the inheritance from one generation to the following. This is important. Could you please picture one person that is in the 30s or 40s and is really having a hard time, or his or her parents suffer an event, an adverse event, and maybe this young person has to support his or her parents. And the children of this young generation will be suffering from this. Now, the children will have to maybe skip school or drop out because of these economic conditions. So parents in the mid-30s, mid-40s that are very close to the poverty line might be or might see even more complicated scenarios because of these economic situations. And this will be inherited from one generation to the following. This is what we refer to when we talk about assurance.
So we are able to see around four things, major things that we should be doing. So in the first is to intervene in the first years of life. Mexican government doesn't put this as a priority. If we see public expenses for early education, there's practically nothing. And if we see the cost and benefit of such an action, this is not a good way, or this would be a good way to invest on. And it relates not only to education, it has to do also with daycare systems, with a health system for the children, as well as education. So we could make sure that this inequality is not going to be reproduced in these first years of life. If we don't address this from the beginning, this is going to be repeated. This problem is going to be repeated, constantly repeated. And please, can we go back? This chart simply shows that there is more poor children than poor adults. The population rate, the children population rate in poverty is higher than those in when adults. So if we don't address this issue from this stage, we're going to have more problems later on. And a second quadrant could be the basic and elementary education, where we can achieve more quality. So the origin of the people or the students doesn't condition the access of these children to high school or to college degrees. And we can have so many ways to help. Scholarships are just one system, but we could prevent desertion from high school. It is truly big. So we are able to make sure that students flow upwards. So education is essential, but we need to break that cycle that we currently have for interruptions, for interrupting school. And also we need to prevent discrimination, for example, for women, that we favor the getting more women hired by the companies, so we can have the elimination of some of laws that refer to gender. We could do very specific things that will facilitate having more women entering the labor world, and that would favor as well their social condition. And we can see here from the cultural standpoint, conditioning the participation of women in labor. We know that it is the father. The higher or the better educated a father is, it is more likely that his daughters will also work later on. And also, of course, we get to see the mother, but the father or the grandfather, or also the wife, for example, or we could say the mother-in-law. But that's why everybody laughed, because he mentioned the mother-in-law. But it is like the opposite. It would be better like if women work, if women are prepared, this is going to be that children and daughters especially are going to be better prepared and then are going to work. So what refers to social protection, we need to establish national protection mechanisms to have access to health, universal pension, insurance in case of disabilities or incapabilities. So in this sense, we have an important part of public policies that refer to this. But we have in this that refers to perception from people. Perception in terms of what are the causes of poverty and what are the causes for success. And for this, we have these objective measurements measured by the public policies. And it is true that each individual and family have intervention in their own future. So what's the perception from people about the causes of poverty? We have interviewed many people about the causes for poverty. I don't know if you get to see the causes, but the most important would be laziness, lack of education, lack of employment, and there are many things that relate to oneself. If we go to success, and this is the next chart, we get to see that the main thing that supports success has to do with oneself, with the work each one performs with their own effort. And this gives us a lead in terms of public policies as something basic that would set the scaffold and scaffold that would give the structure, but it also has to do with personal things that the grandparents doesn't prevent children, daughters specifically girls, to go to high school because they might get pregnant or anything like that. So we might see this in this regards, and we should not only approach this from the public policies, but also from the social actions that might affect positively or negatively the success of individuals. Thank you. we were asking a person, and it was just terrible health, and he had his teeth rotten, and this from a scale from 1 to 5. The typical question was, how are you doing in terms of health? Well, bad, more or less, but he said, I'm doing perfectly, and obviously this person was doing wrong. So when the same question is asked in Mexico City in a high income level to the typical lady from Las Lomas, and you ask her, how are you in terms of health? She says, I'm doing so wrong because I'm suffering from a terrible headache. So that would largely depend on the context in the what refers to these subjective answers. But when we measure mostly objectively in terms of income, for example, we find that there are lots of complications, and I have to give an example from something I lived in Mexico, and this is that we were carrying this evaluation of the opportunities program that is called Prospera, this area, and we know that people learn, and they learn so quickly. When we get home and we ask them, what's the income here? All the people there said in a survey we made at the state of Morelos, they said 4,000 pesos. Everybody was saying 4,000 pesos. So after the 20th household we interviewed, is that we thought everybody saying 4,000 pesos. So then we learned that was the cut point where they would receive or don't receive the help from this Prospera program. So we have to really measure if this is going to be either objective or subjective, but has to be measured well. And also in terms of poverty measurements in Mexico. The next one. Okay, so where is this measure multidimensional measurements coming from? This is very recent. In Mexico, prior to this, we had many ways to measure poverty, and it was said that poverty in Mexico came from 10% to 90%. It was a very impressively big rank, and we didn't know exactly how to measure poverty and what the amount of poverty was. But then in 2004, Coneval was created, and this institute was in order to work on two issues. One, officially measuring poverty in Mexico, and number two, assessing and evaluating public policies. And this concept has been constituted by 6 academicians and an executive secretary to make decisions. So Coneval was ordered to measure poverty by using some variables that have to do with income, of course, the quality of households, access to basic services, access to health services, social security, and food. And there was an eighth dimension that has to do with social cohesion degree that Coneval has not taken, since it doesn't have to do with measuring individuals or households, but it has to do more with territories. And then it was ordered also to measure this on a 2-year basis at a state level, and every 5 years at each municipality. So in terms of methodology, it took almost 4 years to Coneval to get a way of measuring, and there were so many processes. There was consultation to both national and international experts. Specific questions were asked to the experts in order to know how to measure. All kinds of indicators were assessed, and there was a specific survey made to know about this, and there was open fora with academicians and non-academicians. And finally, in 2009, there was a presentation that I will tell you next. This is a measure that is based on human rights. As you know, human rights have many, many characteristics that are inherent, universal, and so on. And this measure by Coneval is based on this. Inherent, that means they are innate to all individuals. Universal is to all the humankind, everywhere, anywhere, and they are they are inseparable. They cannot be divided. There are no hierarchies among them. And the characteristics of these, what are the relevant dimensions? Well, is that they are based on the constitutional law, and the unit of analysis is individuals themselves, because it has to do with universality, and the thresholds for each dimension are based on legal frameworks and criteria. And the thresholds, I think you have to go faster as I speak, otherwise it will take longer. So the thresholds, well, at least with social deprivation, here we also have to take into account the fact that they cannot be dissolved. And of course, we're talking about rights. So these are for everybody. The information sources are the information provided by INEGI, which is the Bureau for Statistics and Geography data. And I will take a minute to tell you that we're concerned about using 7 indicators. So are we going to report them separately, or should we build one single index? And at the end, since this is to measure poverty, that refers to that is there to orient public policies, we thought that it was preferable to set just one index. So every time we measure poverty, we have one indicator and the evolution by separate. So the approach of this methodology is based on 2 axes. So first hand, we have social rights and well-being. This is bringing 2 spaces together that has provided this multidimensional way of measuring. So how does it work? By X's, we measure social services, and by the X of Y's, by the X of X's, and by the X's of Y, we measure social security, householding, and cohesion. Social cohesion we have set aside, and it has to do with more with territory, as I said earlier, and not so much with individual lives. So in the X-axis, we have all the people under below 0, people with no lags, and those who are in yellow have at least one lack. They lack one thing at least. It cannot be seen until we get the chart, please, where we have X's and Y's. I'm sorry. So here we have the line of those who have at least one lack. And here we have the line of economic well-being. And it refers to having the staples and those who don't even have staples. Those people below this line don't even have enough income to obtain that kind of well-being with the staples. And then we have one lack or more. In the intersection within these 2 sections, people who have 1 or more lacks and are underneath the well-being line, they are orange. They are the multidimensional poor people in Mexico. So one people is in poverty when they have at least one social lack and they don't have enough income to satisfy their basic needs. So this is the official definition. And then we established a line of minimum well-being that only relates to the value of one basket of staples, much smaller now, and we established that those who have 3 lakhs and are underneath that minimum well-being line, we have called them extreme poor people. And these are the red ones. These are the red quadrant. These are extreme poverty people, multidimensional. So then we have moderate poverty are within the orange quadrant, and then we have two additional quadrants. Those who are people who are vulnerable in terms of their income, because their income is underneath the well-being line and they have no lags, and those who are socially vulnerable that have an income above the well-being line but lack something somehow. And then the green quadrant are those who are not poor, have no lags, and have no problems in terms of income. So the idea here is to have with this multidimensional measurements to generate the public policies that have here, we can see the quadrants going to the right, to the green quadrant. Here we have Mexican population distributed in these 5 quadrants that I have explained, and Coneval presented indicators of percentage the number of poor in Mexico. But also we acknowledge that it is not the same to be a multidimensional poor very close to the left than being a multidimensional poor approaching the right. So we have indicators that take this into account and take in poverty intensity into account. How do we determine thresholds? This is something that has made measuring poverty in Mexico very, very special. In all cases, we have used scientific criteria. When we were not able to have them to identify thresholds, we consulted the different federal government instances that work with the measurement and follow-up of these topics. For the basket of staples, this is a modern basket that takes into account calories and nutritional elements. It takes into account the patterns of consumption in time, and also we have a different staples basket, different for the rural population compared to the urban population. In terms of this basket of staples, we have to take the one that relates to food and the other one that refers to utilities and services for these people, and we have a different one for the rural scope and the urban scope. And this is how we define both lines: minimum well-being line and well-being line. I'm going to skip this one. Next one. So how can we determine? We are going to determine the thresholds for social lag. In terms of educational lagging, we have divided population. The population that is currently within the school age from 3 to 15 years must be attending to school, otherwise they present lag. Population above 16 years of age, they have other standards applied to them. Not necessarily they had to finish elementary or junior high school. For those who were born before 1981, they are required to have complete elementary school, and those who were born after 1981 must have junior high school. In terms of health services, we have 3 conditions: if they have access to popular security or any other political public institution for social security, or if they have private medical security. And then access to social security, here we have 4: direct access to social security, or because they are related to somebody who has, or because they have medical services from somebody who has this due to social security, or because they have hired insurance services. And also if people belong or don't belong or have received pension from social programs. The quality of households, the spaces, the roofing, the materials, the kind of flooring, or if many people live in one household. If something is missing, we consider this like access to utilities from the household. We take into account the quality of water, drainage, electricity, and all that. As access to food as well, we measure food security, and we have divided population in two elements: those who have food security or those who have food insecurity, or this insecurity could be mild or severe. If they are within these quadrants, they are considered to have lack of food security. So these are the schemes, and these are the indicators of poverty for Mexico. These are the most recent that Mexico has. These are from 2012. Next year we are going to have our indicators for 2014, and this is the way Mexican population has been distributed. We have 11.5 million people in extreme poverty, 41.8 million moderately poor. Vulnerable due to income is 7.2 million people. 33.5 million people are vulnerable because they have social lacks, and 23.2 million people are not poor in Mexico. The next one. And I am going to show to you one of the advantages of measuring this in Mexico is that we can add this to each state. Here I am presenting to you the percentages of poor at each of the states within Mexico. As Mariana said a while ago, we consolidated this in one index, but it can be added at the different states. The addition of all the poverty in the different states in Mexico gives us the total amount of poor. So, for example, here we're in Jalisco. Jalisco, we can see it didn't go so well in 2010, 2012. They had 37% poor and 39.8 in 2012. And if we consider extreme poverty, Jalisco once again 5.3 in 2010 and 5.8 2012. So another advantage of this multidimensional poverty in Mexico is that on a 5-year basis we carry this at a municipal level. So we know by each municipality how they are doing in terms of poverty level. And why are we doing this? This has served to the limit, or to know exactly what public policies will be. And since the administration of Peña Nieto and all the public policies carried not only at the federal level but at the state level have the aim to reduce poverty, the way we are measuring, the way Coneval is measuring this. So we are very much aligned to what the federal government is measuring and to what the public policies, the way public. Thank you. And we are going to finish this panel with Ms. Gabriela Toro, who is an Argentinian professor. She is from the University of Lomas de Zamora and from the Research Center for Social Sciences, the University of Palermo in Argentina. She's the editor of Handbooks of Quality of Life of Springer Graciela. We are going to have her here in video conference through technologies. We're going to have. Now I will show you my PowerPoint presentation. So I entitled my presentation Subjects as Leading Characters and Policies for Well-Being, a way of getting to see this and the different capabilities. And this is a theoretical frame I have been working for so many years, and that's why I wanted to integrate you in this presentation. Particularly, I want to reflect upon 4 topics that you are getting to see on the screen: social well-being, quality of life, social policies and the role people play, and to measure quality of life and inequalities, and to recover the subjective experience from the citizens when making decisions for public policies, right? So, Surely all the people who are present in this know the concept of well-being. What I want here to remark is that social well-being has been a phenomenon that has been shared collectively, as well as the status of well-being. We've known this for decades, and centering the approach of this in terms of social, we have to measure this from the minimum established. In this regard, the quality of life has tried to overcome this way to think about it. That is not only in terms of concepts. Well-being should not be considered only from the material standpoint, but also from the human values standpoint. So we can say that quality of life is a multidimensional concept that includes many dimensions that people value differently according to the importance they give to each of them in their lives. That needs to be seen both objectively and subjectively in terms of the people life, and then by setting the difference from other notions and concepts that I'm sure are going to be worked in this seminar that refer to life conditions, well-being, economic well-being, and psychological well-being. So what we want to say is that quality of life presents to us a possibility of a new theoretical view that works from lags, but anchoring itself in the community with an analysis of the social and political context where the life of people is developed. And for this specifically, the person that traditionally was considered as a study, as an object of study, is now going to become a subject. And this, I'm sorry, and this policy is going to be based on specifically on human rights that will give us that will make force us to work in an integrated manner. I am going to refer to some of the concepts that Amartya Sen, some of the one awarded. One researcher awarded with the Nobel Prize, Amartya Sen, that tells us about democracy, that is the only system for organizing politics. For this author, individual freedom is a social commitment, and it is from this perspective that subjects are perceived as active agents of change, and not only as receptors of goods or articles. So we need to think that we should not think that public policies are mechanical resources to reach development. It would depend on the usage of opportunities and the participation that they enable, as well as the fostering of values within a society. So we can say that social policies generated are ways or forms in which public policies are established. And the analysis has to be considered in terms of the historic moment and the geographical space where these policies emerge and get developed, as well as the effect and the impact, whether expected or generated by them.
I have a concern, and of course my main focus is the social work. I worked many years as a social worker, and this is one of my main concerns and interests. And I understand that policies are not only downsized to the giving benefits to the society, but furthermore, it is somehow connected to the relationships that can be created and how the services can be provided or rendered. Now, these relationships can have different shapes. It could be, for example, the self-determination of the people and the characteristics of the people that will be prospects. Then there will be active subjects. And the subject should not be converted into a passive recipient of the perk or the benefit that he or she is receiving. Now, we have the distortions that we have noticed, and the selection of the people that will be selected to receive potential recipients. We have incentives that are distorted. There's a stigma. There's a loss of intimacy, administrative costs, and the most important one is the corruption that exists in this type of programs. So the life quality focus that we now know as the human capabilities differ from the traditional evaluation, given that the person acts and provokes changes, whose achievements can be evaluated based on the values and objectives set forward by, say, said person, independently from external criteria. I don't want to say by this that external criteria are not needed. Of course, they are needed, but I want to place the subject as the most important axis here. Human capabilities, then, has been widely studied, widely debated as well, since it was first appeared on the scene. And we have information that was hidden, and it was more extensive than the one that was actually shared. Now, when we talk about the evaluation of the human capabilities, we understand that there's a relevance for complementing the context for the development to take place. Since the year 2004, at the Lomas de Zamora National University in Buenos Aires, Argentina, we worked on this quality of life program and inequalities, and we focused during this past year on a tool or an instrument that can help us derive indicators, non-traditional indicators, so that they can be used not only in Argentina but also throughout Latin America. We have been measuring quality of life and inequalities amongst the young people, and the instrument has specific variations and dimensions with social demographic conditions, as well as quality of life and inequality measurement approaches. And we need to know what is to be measured directly and indirectly, because we have to understand that this is very complex from any perspective. Very briefly, I suppose that you are actually having access to the slides on PDF, but I would like to elaborate on the dimensions, for example, education, health, labor or work, personal safety, housing, spiritual and religious beliefs, cultural diversity, participation, gender, discrimination, environment, social community relations, social relations or relationships, subjective well-being, values, satisfaction with of life, economic well-being, institutions, institutional politics, and this is information that is required for the society to be indirectly reported on democracy. This is the way people can be informed about democracy and other factors as well. But this is quantitative, but it's also qualitative, the approach that I will next elaborate on. We need to know that people located in the midst of this type of analysis should be understood from the social life they are actually living, and the way their meaning, their own meaning, is developed. At the Palermo University in Argentina, we now talk about friendship as a value, a core value for countries to be built upon. Why friendship? Well, qualitatively, friendship is always at the highest level in Argentina. How satisfied people feel about their friends. We worked with university students, and we wanted to see how important friendship was for their lives. It turns out that we always go back to what happened 25 centuries ago by Aristotle with regards to friendship. I know that I have very short time to present this, and I don't have time to measure what happens with the audience. I would like to see your faces now, but it's not possible for me, and I would like you to ask me questions, but that's not possible either. So as a conclusion, let me tell you that academicians as well as researchers have to see the macro and micro social looks, the views of the people, the scope of the people, and always be present on any dynamic social activities that pertain to our communities. We have to know how this can be transferred to the structure of a certain era. If we consider that human phenomena are subjective because of their specificity, we will then understand subjectivity not as a counterposition to objectivity. As a matter of fact, we need to integrate both views. When from the researcher perspective, we are subjects that are connected to one another, and the outcome is socially and historically constructed. Our objects then are not only for observation purposes, but we are talking about entities and well-beings. These beings have their own world, the self pre-interpretation, and we need to insert them in a reality, and they are interconnected. We as researchers and they are, as subjects, follow the same trend. We are always interconnected. Now, the people that make decisions, the policymakers, if you will, they mandate to have information that is both quantitative and qualitative, responding not only to the external conditions of the subject's life, but furthermore, the multidimensional terms. Hence, it's required to have a system in place for social protection that takes into account the biographic trajectory of the subjects. Finally, as I wrap up, I would like to remember what Lechner said many years ago. In the year 2002, he's a Chilean philosopher. He said, it's useless to fix material problems if at the same time politics do not take into consideration the subjective livelihood of life of people on a day-to-day. Thank you very much. I do hope that I respected my time, and I am here to serve you in any way possible. Thank you. We would like to thank Graciela Tonon. She was not listening to us, but it was excellent time-wise. And as a matter of fact, we do have some couple of minutes to thank her from Guadalajara. She's now in the city of Guadalajara. As a matter of fact, she's listening. On my headset, I am listening that she is listening to the comments, to the thanking and compliments. And to finalize this panel, I would like to extend my appreciation to the panel members and how all the views were complemented. The previous one, for example, Bruno Faes with his happiness indicators, despite the fact that the following conversations had nothing to do with his indexes, were complementing. So it was interesting to see how they were intertwined. And Bruno Faes woke up this morning, money is not important to be happy. And now Bruno, with his research, has proven that that's the case. However, money is important based on his outcomes, and measuring public policies for well-being and development should also become part of the fundamental debate and motivation of social mobility. And as Enrique said, with his research, unfortunately, there's still much to do so that we can have more mobility, and the relevance set forward by both Gracielas and Mariana, two from Argentina, one from Mexico, talking about consensus and the need for consensus and broadened criteria so that the well-being indicators can be better understood. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Graciela. Thank you, Mariana. And thank you, Enrique, for sharing your time with us. And we would like to thank the audience as well for your participation. Thank you, and the best luck for the rest of the day.